Evelyn Hartley was no stranger to solitude. She thrived on it, actually. Growing up in the quaint, sleepy town of Willow Ridge, she found solace in the quiet rhythms of her daily life. Her days revolved around working at the local library, and her evenings were spent sketching in her small attic studio, where she could see the tops of the trees swaying in the breeze. The forests surrounding Willow Ridge were both a comfort and a mystery. A lush expanse of green that seemed alive, almost sentient. The townsfolk often shared stories about the forest, warning children and even adults to avoid venturing too deep into it. Legends spoke of strange sightings, eerie howls, and a presence that was neither human nor animal. Evelyn dismissed these tales as mere folklore. That was until the evening that changed her life. It was late when Evelyn finished her shift at the library. The streetlights flickered softly, casting a warm glow on the cobblestone streets. Normally she would take the long way home, avoiding the woods entirely, but that night she was tired. The shortcut through the forest beckoned her, a path she had always avoided out of caution but had always wondered about. With a deep breath, Evelyn stepped onto the trail, the crunch of leaves beneath her feet the only sound in the stillness. The deeper she went, the darker it became. The trees seemed to loom closer together, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. That's when she heard it, a low growl that sent a shiver down her spine. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Slowly she turned her head, and that's when she saw him. He stood a few feet away, leaning casually against a tree, yet there was nothing casual about him. He was tall, his figure bathed in shadows, but what struck her most were his eyes. They were golden, almost glowing, and they pierced through the darkness like a predator's. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant, breaking the silence like a crack of thunder. Evelyn couldn't find her voice. Something about him was both terrifying and magnetic. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "I didn't mean to scare you," he added, his tone softening. Evelyn finally managed to speak, though her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'm fine. I should go." She turned quickly, her heart racing as she hurried down the path. She could feel his gaze on her back, watching her until she disappeared from view. That night as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the image of those golden eyes. The sun filtered through the curtains of Evelyn's small attic apartment, waking her gently. For a moment she lay still, staring at the wooden beams above her bed and trying to push away the memory of the previous night. She told herself it had been her imagination. Maybe she'd been overly tired, and her mind had conjured up the image of a man in the woods to spook her. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't forget those glowing golden eyes. The morning air was crisp as she stepped outside, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. Evelyn always stopped at the coffee shop on Main Street before heading to the library. It was her morning ritual, a small slice of comfort in her otherwise uneventful life. The scent of roasted coffee beans and warm pastries greeted her as she pushed the door open, the tiny bell above the frame jingling softly. She moved toward the counter, scanning the chalkboard menu even though she always ordered the same thing, a latte and a blueberry muffin. As she waited in line, a sensation prickled the back of her neck. Someone was watching her. Turning her head slowly, Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. There he was. The man from the forest was seated in the corner of the cafe, one arm draped over the back of his chair, a coffee cup cradled in his other hand. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, but his eyes were anything but. They were locked onto her, the same golden hue she had seen the night before, now illuminated by the soft morning light. For a moment, Evelyn considered leaving. She could turn around, step out the door and avoid whatever this was. But before she could act, he stood and began walking toward her. "Good morning," he said when he reached her, his voice low and smooth. Evelyn blinked, gripping the strap of her bag tightly. "Morning," she replied, her tone wary. His lips curved into a small smile and he gestured toward the counter. "Do you come here often, or was it fate that brought us to the same place twice?" The line moved forward and Evelyn took a small step toward the register, unsure how to respond. I stop here before work," she said finally. "Work?" His head tilted slightly, his curiosity evident. "At the library," she explained. His smile widened. "A book lover. That explains a lot." "What does that mean?" she asked, frowning slightly. You just seem thoughtful, he said with a shrug. Like someone who spends a lot of time in her head. Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but the barista interrupted, asking for her order. She quickly paid, grabbed her coffee and muffin and made her way to the exit, her pulse racing. She wasn't sure if it was his presence or his words that had unsettled her, but either way she needed space. Wait, he called after her. She hesitated, her hand on the door. I didn't mean to scare you last night, he said, his tone sincere. I walk in the forest sometimes. It helps me think. I wasn't expecting to run into anyone. Evelyn turned to face him, her brow furrowing. It's fine. I just wasn't expecting to see anyone either. Can I at least introduce myself? He asked. She hesitated before nodding. I'm Lucas Gray, he said, extending his hand. Evelyn Hartley, she replied, shaking it briefly. His grip was warm and firm, and she noticed faint scars on his knuckles, as if he'd been in fights or worked with his hands. Well, Evelyn, Lucas said, his smile returning, I hope we run into each other again. With that he returned to his seat, leaving Evelyn standing there, her thoughts spinning. She quickly exited the cafe, her heart thudding in her chest. Later that day, as she shelved books at the library, Evelyn couldn't stop replaying the encounter in her mind. There was something about Lucas. Something she couldn't quite place. He was charming, yes, but there was an intensity to him, a sense of something hidden beneath the surface. That evening, as she walked home, she kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see him following her. But the streets were quiet, and the forest loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding. For the next few days, Lucas seemed to appear wherever Evelyn went. He showed up at the coffee shop each morning, always greeting her with that same enigmatic smile. Once she caught him browsing the shelves at the library, though he didn't check out any books. He even appeared on the walking trail she used to clear her mind after work. Are you stalking me? She asked one evening, half joking but unable to hide the edge of suspicion in her voice. Lucas chuckled. You think I have nothing better to do than follow you around? I don't know, she said, crossing her arms. Do you? I like talking to you, he admitted, his expression turning serious. You're different from anyone I've met before. Evelyn didn't know how to respond. She wanted to believe him, but a part of her couldn't help wondering why someone like Lucas, a man so confident, so magnetic, would take an interest in her. Despite her doubts, she found herself drawn to him. His presence became a part of her routine, a comfort she hadn't realized she needed. And though she still didn't fully trust him, she couldn't deny the growing connection between them. What she didn't know was that Lucas felt the same pull, a magnetic force he couldn't explain, a need to be near her that went beyond logic. For the first time in his life, Lucas Gray, the man who had spent years running from his past, felt like he had found something worth staying for. Evelyn wasn't sure when Lucas went from being a chance encounter to someone who felt like a fixture in her life. Over the weeks that followed, his presence became something she almost expected. Whether it was at the coffee shop in the morning, walking past the library window with a casual wave, or bumping into him on her evening walks, Lucas seemed to have woven himself into the fabric of her days. At first, Evelyn kept her guard up. She wasn't used to someone paying her this much attention, and it felt almost too good to be true. But Lucas had a way of making her laugh, of easing her insecurities without even realizing it. His charm wasn't forced or calculated. It felt genuine, which made it all the harder to resist. One crisp autumn afternoon, Lucas showed up at the library just as Evelyn was locking up. She looked up from her keys to find him leaning against the brick wall, his golden eyes catching the late afternoon sunlight. Hey, he said with an easy smile. Thought I'd walk you home. Evelyn blinked, surprised. You don't have to do that. I know, he said, shrugging. But I want to. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. Together they started down the cobblestone path that led toward her apartment. The streets were quiet, lined with trees whose leaves had turned vibrant shades of orange and red. So, Lucas said after a while, what made you want to work at the library? Evelyn smiled softly. I've always loved books. Growing up, they were my escape. No matter what was happening around me, I could lose myself in a story. It felt like magic, you know? Lucas nodded, his expression thoughtful. That makes sense. You seem like someone who sees the beauty in small things. Evelyn glanced at him, her cheeks flushing. What about you? What brought you to Willow Ridge? Lucas was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed ahead. I guess you could say I was looking for a fresh start. The city, it's not the kind of place where you can breathe, not really. I wanted something quieter, somewhere I could figure things out. Figure what out? Evelyn asked, her curiosity piqued. He hesitated, his jaw tightening slightly. Just life, I guess. Evelyn didn't press him, sensing that there was more to his answer than he was letting on. Instead, she changed the subject, telling him about a painting she had been working on in her studio. Lucas listened intently, asking questions and encouraging her in a way that made her feel like her passion mattered. As the weeks turned into months, their bond deepened. Lucas began to open up, sharing pieces of his past in bits and pieces. He told her about growing up in a family that never really understood him, about how he had always felt out of place in the city's fast-paced, superficial world. He mentioned his love for working with his hands, how woodworking had been his way of creating something tangible, something real. Evelyn found herself sharing more of herself too. She talked about her insecurities, the way she often felt invisible, like she was just another face in the crowd. She confessed her fear of being vulnerable, of letting someone in only to be hurt. I know how that feels, Lucas said one evening as they sat on the hill overlooking the town. The sunset bathed everything in a golden glow, making his eyes seem even more luminous. It's easier to keep people at arm's length, isn't it? Safer. Evelyn nodded, her heart aching with the weight of his words. But it gets lonely. Yeah, Lucas agreed quietly. It does. Despite their growing closeness, Evelyn couldn't completely shake her insecurities. Lucas was handsome, confident, and mysterious. Everything she wasn't. She couldn't help wondering why he had chosen her. One night as they walked through the forest, the question finally slipped out. Lucas, she began hesitantly, why are you spending so much time with me? He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. What do you mean? I mean, she looked down, nervously kicking at a fallen leaf. I just don't understand why someone like you would want to be around someone like me. Someone like me, he repeated, a flicker of something, hurt maybe, crossing his face. You're so confident, so sure of yourself, Evelyn said, struggling to find the right words. And I'm just, me. Quiet, awkward, ordinary. Lucas stepped closer, his golden eyes searching hers. Evelyn, he said softly, you're not ordinary. Not to me. She looked away, her cheeks burning. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to, he insisted. I'm saying it because it's true. You see yourself one way, but that's not how I see you. You're kind, thoughtful, and so much stronger than you realize. Evelyn's chest tightened, a lump forming in her throat. She wanted to believe him, but the doubts that had plagued her for so long weren't so easily silenced. Lucas reached out, gently tilting her chin so she had no choice but to meet his gaze. You're not invisible, Evelyn, he said firmly. Not to me. In that moment, standing beneath the canopy of trees with the moonlight filtering through the leaves, Evelyn felt something shift. It wasn't an instant erasure of her insecurities, but it was a start, a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. Their relationship continued to grow, but it wasn't without its challenges. Evelyn's insecurities occasionally surfaced, leading to moments of tension between them. Lucas, for all his patience, sometimes struggled to reassure her, especially when she questioned his feelings or his motives. But no matter how difficult things became, they always found their way back to each other. Whether it was through long, heartfelt conversations, quiet walks through the forest, or simply sitting together in comfortable silence, their connection deepened with each passing day. For Lucas, being with Evelyn felt like coming home, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. And for Evelyn, Lucas became a source of strength, someone who made her feel like she was enough just as she was. Neither of them knew where their journey would lead, but one thing was certain. They were willing to take the risk together. The crisp air of late autumn was filled with the faint scent of earth and pine as Evelyn walked along the forest path with Lucas. The crunch of leaves beneath their feet was the only sound breaking the comfortable silence between them. She glanced up at him occasionally, wondering how he always managed to seem so at ease. Since Lucas had entered her life, things had changed in ways Evelyn couldn't fully explain. She felt lighter, as though a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had started to lift. But along with the lightness came doubt, an unwelcome companion that whispered to her in her quietest moments. "Penny for your thoughts?" Lucas asked, his deep voice pulling her from her reverie. She looked up at him, startled. What? You've been quiet, he said, a teasing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. More than usual, I mean. Evelyn hesitated. She wanted to brush it off, to pretend everything was fine, but the sincerity in his golden eyes made it impossible to hide. It's nothing, she said softly, though even she could hear the lie in her voice. Lucas stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. Evelyn, if something's bothering you, you can tell me. I don't want you to feel like you have to keep things to yourself. She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip. It's just, sometimes I wonder why you're here. With me, I mean. Lucas frowned, tilting his head slightly. What do you mean? She looked down, kicking at a stray pebble. You could be with anyone. Someone who's more confident, more exciting. I'm just me. For a moment Lucas said nothing. Then he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, grounding. Evelyn, he said, his voice steady, do you think I'm here out of pity? Or because I don't have anything better to do? She shook her head quickly. No, it's not that. I don't understand why you'd choose me when you could have someone better. Lucas let out a soft sigh and stepped closer, his gaze locking onto hers. You don't see yourself the way I do, he said quietly. You think you're ordinary, but you're not. You're thoughtful, creative, and you have this way of seeing the world that's so pure. You make me want to be better, Evelyn. Her breath hitched and she felt her cheeks flush. I don't know if I believe that. He smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. That's okay. I'll remind you as many times as it takes. The next few weeks passed in a blur of quiet moments and small adventures. Lucas had a knack for drawing Evelyn out of her shell, whether it was convincing her to try a new hiking trail or sharing stories from his past that made her laugh until her sides hurt. But even as their bond deepened, Evelyn couldn't fully shake her insecurities. They crept in during the quiet moments, whispering doubts into her ear. Was she enough for him? What if he realized he had made a mistake? One evening, as they sat in her small attic studio, Evelyn decided to paint while Lucas watched. She loved the way the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the window, casting warm hues across the room. Do you ever paint people? Lucas asked, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. Sometimes, Evelyn replied, dipping her brush into a soft shade of blue. But it's harder than landscapes or abstract stuff. There's so much emotion in a face. It's intimidating. Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You should paint me. He paused, looking over at him. You? He grinned. Why not? I think I'd make a great subject. Evelyn rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a small smile. I'll think about it. As the evening wore on, Lucas's presence filled the space like a warm blanket. But as much as she cherished these moments, Evelyn couldn't help the creeping doubt that still lingered in the back of her mind. The first crack in their newfound harmony came during a town gathering. It was a festival to celebrate the changing seasons, with music, food stalls, and lanterns strung across the square. Lucas had convinced Evelyn to attend, despite her initial reluctance. You'll have fun, he had said, taking her hand as they walked into the bustling square. The first she had. The music was lively, the air filled with the scent of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon. Lucas stayed close, his easy charm drawing smiles from everyone they met. But as the evening wore on, Evelyn began to feel out of place. It started when a group of young women approached Lucas, their laughter ringing out as they greeted him. Evelyn hung back, unsure of what to do as they flirted openly, their smiles bright and confident. You must be new in town, one of them said, her eyes flicking over him appreciatively. We'd have noticed you otherwise. Lucas chuckled, his tone polite but distant. Yeah, I moved here a few months ago. Evelyn stood awkwardly to the side, feeling invisible. She didn't miss the way the women barely acknowledged her presence, their attention focused solely on Lucas. When the group finally moved on, Lucas turned back to Evelyn, his brow furrowing. You okay? She forced a smile. I'm fine. But she wasn't. The encounter had stirred up all her insecurities, making her feel small and inadequate. That night as they walked home, Evelyn was quiet. Lucas noticed, of course, and stopped her just before they reached her apartment. Evelyn, what's wrong? He asked, his tone gentle but firm. She hesitated, then blurted out, Why are you even with me, Lucas? You could have anyone, You saw how those women looked at you tonight. They're everything I'm not. Lucas's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. Evelyn, stop. You're doing it again, doubting yourself, doubting us. Because I don't understand, she said, her voice rising. I don't understand why someone like you would choose me. Lucas stepped closer, his eyes blazing. I'm with you because I want to be Evelyn. Those women don't matter to me. You do. She looked away, tears stinging her eyes. I'm scared, Lucas. I'm scared that one day you'll realize I'm not enough. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. Evelyn, listen to me. You are enough. You've always been enough. And I'm not going anywhere. For a long moment they stood there, the quiet night wrapping around them like a cocoon. Slowly, Evelyn let herself lean into him, her doubts momentarily silenced by the steady beat of his heart against hers. And though the shadows of doubt still lingered, Evelyn began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Lucas was right.
The winter months in Willow Ridge were quiet, blanketed in soft snow and a sense of stillness. Evelyn loved the season, the way the frost clung to the trees like lace, the crunch of snow underfoot, and the warm glow of candles she kept in her apartment. It was peaceful, and for a time so was her relationship with Lucas. Their bond seemed to grow stronger with every passing day. Lucas had a way of making her feel seen, of reminding her that she was more than her doubts and insecurities. But as much as Evelyn tried to believe him, the nagging voice of self-doubt still lurked in the back of her mind, waiting for an opportunity to resurface. One particularly cold afternoon, Lucas surprised Evelyn at the library, a takeaway cup of hot chocolate in each hand. She looked up from her desk, startled, as he walked in with a lopsided grin. Thought you might need a pick-me-up, he said, setting one of the cups in front of her. Evelyn smiled, her cheeks warming. Thank you. What brings you here? Lucas shrugged, leaning casually against the counter. Just wanted to see you. Also, I thought I'd finally check out this library everyone in town keeps talking about. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Everyone in town? Okay, maybe just you, he admitted with a chuckle. She shook her head, laughing softly. Well, welcome. Feel free to browse, but no talking loudly or eating snacks, or I'll have to kick you out. Yes, ma'am, Lucas said, giving her a mock salute. As he wandered through the shelves, Evelyn found herself watching him. He moved with an easy confidence, his golden eyes scanning the rows of books as though he belonged there. She couldn't help but smile, marveling at how effortlessly he had become a part of her life. Later that evening, Lucas joined Evelyn in her small apartment. They sat on the floor by the coffee table, a stack of books between them as the wind howled outside. Okay, Lucas said, holding up a battered paperback. This one's about a detective who solves crimes in his sleep. You can't tell me that doesn't sound amazing. Evelyn laughed, shaking her head. I'm not sure amazing is the word I'd use, but it does sound interesting. Fine, he said, setting the book aside. Your turn. What's your favorite book of all time? She hesitated, her fingers brushing the spine of an old, well-loved novel. It's hard to pick just one, but if I had to choose, it would be this. Lucas leaned over to read the title. The Secret Garden, he read aloud. Why this one? Evelyn smiled wistfully. It's about finding beauty and hope in unlikely places. I read it for the first time when I was a kid, and it's always stayed with me. Lucas studied her for a moment, his expression softening. That suits you. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? You're like that, he said, his voice quiet. You see beauty in places other people overlook. Evelyn's heart clenched and she looked away, unsure how to respond. As the weeks passed, Evelyn began to notice small changes in herself. She laughed more easily, found herself looking forward to the moments she spent with Lucas. For the first time in years, she felt like she was beginning to trust someone completely. But trust, she realized, was a fragile thing. One evening, Evelyn found herself standing outside Lucas's workshop. He had invited her over to see a project he had been working on, a piece of furniture he was particularly proud of. When she stepped inside, she was greeted by the scent of sawdust and the warm glow of a single overhead light. Lucas was hunched over a workbench, his hands moving deftly as he sanded the edge of a wooden chair. Hey, she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, his face breaking into a smile. You made it. Evelyn walked over, her eyes scanning the room. It was filled with tools, unfinished pieces, and the faint hum of a small radio playing in the background. This is incredible, she said, running her fingers over the smooth surface of the chair. Lucas grinned, clearly pleased. Thanks. I've been working on it for weeks. I wanted it to be perfect. It's beautiful, she said, her voice full of genuine admiration. Lucas hesitated, then gestured to a small table in the corner. I actually made something else too. For you. Evelyn's eyes widened. For me. He nodded, walking over to the table and picking up a small wooden box. It was intricately carved, the lid adorned with a delicate floral pattern. I remembered you saying you liked keeping little trinkets and mementos, he said, handing it to her. So I thought this might be something you'd like. Evelyn stared at the box, her throat tightening. Lucas, it's amazing. Thank you. He shrugged, his cheeks tinged with faint color. I just wanted to make you something special. For a moment, Evelyn felt a wave of warmth wash over her. But then almost as quickly doubt crept in. What if this was all too good to be true? What if Lucas was only doing these things because he felt sorry for her? The thought lingered, casting a shadow over the moment. That night, as they sat together on the couch, Evelyn's insecurities bubbled to the surface. Lucas, she said hesitantly, why do you do all these things for me? He frowned, turning to look at her. What do you mean? I mean, the gifts, the little surprises, all of it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes I feel like I don't deserve it. Lucas's expression softened and he reached out to take her hand. Evelyn, you deserve all of it and more. I don't do these things because I feel obligated. I do them because I want to. Because you're important to me. She looked down, her fingers tightening around his. I'm scared, Lucas. Scared that one day you'll realize I'm not enough. His grip on her hand tightened and he leaned closer, his golden eyes locking onto hers. That's never going to happen. You're enough, Evelyn. You've always been enough. In that moment, Evelyn wanted to believe him. But the shadows of doubt were not so easily banished, and she couldn't help but wonder if they would ever truly go away. Winter deepened in Willow Ridge, blanketing the town in a pristine coat of snow that sparkled under the pale sunlight. The days grew shorter and the nights colder, but Evelyn's time with Lucas remained the warmest part of her life. Yet beneath the surface of their relationship, cracks were beginning to form. Evelyn's insecurities, though momentarily quelled by Lucas's reassurances, continued to gnaw at her. She knew she should trust him, trust what they were building together, but her own fears whispered otherwise. It started with small things. Lucas had always been open about his work, his past, and his thoughts, but Evelyn began noticing moments when he seemed distracted or distant. He would brush it off, saying he was preoccupied with a project or tired, but it left her wondering if something deeper was wrong. One afternoon, as they walked through the snowy woods, Evelyn found herself glancing at him more often than usual. He was quiet, his brow furrowed in thought. Everything okay? She asked softly, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. Lucas glanced at her, his expression softening. Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking about some stuff. Evelyn hesitated. Stuff about work? Something like that, he said vaguely, offering a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Her stomach tightened, but she didn't press him further. Later that week, Evelyn decided to surprise Lucas by visiting his workshop. She figured it might cheer him up, or at least give her a chance to understand what had been bothering him. When she arrived, she found the door slightly ajar. Inside, Lucas was talking to someone, his voice low and serious. Curiosity and unease battled within her as she quietly stepped closer, her ears straining to pick up the conversation. Just don't tell her yet, Lucas was saying. I'll figure it out. She doesn't need to know right now. Evelyn froze, her heart pounding. Who was he talking to? And what was it he didn't want her to know? She heard a muffled response, but before she could catch the rest, the floor creaked beneath her foot. Lucas's head snapped up, his golden eyes locking onto hers. Evelyn. She swallowed hard, stepping fully into the room. Hi. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just thought I'd stop by. Lucas's expression shifted, his initial surprise giving way to a forced smile. Hey. I wasn't expecting you. Evelyn glanced around, but whoever he had been speaking to was gone. Who were you talking to? Just a friend, he said quickly, his tone casual. They stopped by to ask for some help with a project. Her gaze lingered on him, searching for any sign that he wasn't telling the truth. Oh. Okay. Lucas stepped closer, his hands brushing her arms. You're freezing. Let's head back to your place, I'll make us some tea. Evelyn nodded, but the unease in her chest didn't fade. That evening, as Lucas brewed tea in her kitchen, Evelyn sat on the couch, her mind racing. Who was that person at his workshop? And what had Lucas meant when he said she didn't need to know something? She wanted to ask him outright, but fear held her back. What if the answer confirmed her worst fears? When Lucas joined her with 2 steaming mugs, he seemed more relaxed than earlier. He handed her a cup and sat beside her, his arm draping over the back of the couch. You've been quiet, he said, his voice gentle. What's on your mind? Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tightening around the mug. Nothing. Just tired, I guess. Lucas frowned slightly, his golden eyes searching hers. You sure? She forced a smile. Yeah. I'm fine. But she wasn't fine. The doubt that had always lingered at the edges of her mind now felt like a storm brewing, threatening to destroy everything they had built. The following week, Evelyn's unease came to a head. She couldn't keep pretending everything was okay, not when her mind was spinning with questions. One evening, as they sat together in the warm glow of her living room, she finally worked up the courage to confront him. Lucas, she began hesitantly, can I ask you something? Of course, he said, setting his book aside and turning to face her. She took a deep breath. That day at your workshop, who were you talking to? And what did you mean when you said I didn't need to know something? Lucas's expression froze, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Evelyn, it's not what you think, he said carefully. Then what is it? She pressed, her voice trembling. He hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. It's just, there's something I've been working on. A project I've been planning for months. I didn't want to tell you about it until I was sure it would work out. Evelyn frowned. Why? Why wouldn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to disappoint you if it fell through, he admitted. I've been talking to a friend about starting a custom furniture line. It's something I've always dreamed of, but it's risky and I didn't want you to worry. She stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind. Relief warred with frustration. Relief that it wasn't something worse, but frustration that he hadn't trusted her enough to share his plans. Lucas, I would have supported you, she said softly. Even if it didn't work out. I want to be there for you the way you've been there for me. He looked up, his eyes filled with regret. I know. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I didn't mean to shut you out. I just didn't want to add to your stress. Her heart ached at his words, but she couldn't shake the lingering hurt. I don't want us to have secrets, Lucas. If we're going to make this work, we need to trust each other completely. He nodded, reaching for her hand. You're right. No more secrets. I promise. Evelyn squeezed his hand, but as much as she wanted to believe him, a part of her couldn't help wondering if their fragile foundation would be strong enough to withstand the storms ahead.
The days following their conversation were filled with a delicate calm. Lucas made an effort to include Evelyn in his plans for the custom furniture line, showing her sketches and talking about his ideas. He seemed determined to prove that he was keeping his promise of no more secrets. Evelyn wanted to believe him, and for a time she did. But deep down she couldn't quiet the voice in her head that told her she wasn't enough. That eventually Lucas would tire of her doubts and leave. One crisp morning, Evelyn sat by her window watching the snow fall. A small mug of tea sat in her hands, warming her fingers. Her mind wandered back to their earlier conversation, replaying his words. He had promised no more secrets, but her insecurities had planted a seed of doubt. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her coworker, Sophie. Sophie, hey. Saw Lucas in town earlier. Who was the brunette he was with? Eyes. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She read the message again, her mind racing. A brunette? She typed out a quick reply, trying to keep her tone casual. Evelyn, are you sure it was him? Sophie, pretty sure. They were at the cafe on Main Street. Didn't want to bother him, but I thought you'd know who she was. Evelyn stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She had no idea who Sophie was talking about, and the thought of Lucas spending time with someone else without mentioning it made her chest tighten. That evening, Evelyn decided to confront Lucas. She wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the thought of him keeping something from her was too much to bear. When he arrived at her apartment, he greeted her with his usual warm smile. Hey, he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. How was your day? She stepped back, avoiding his touch. Who were you with at the cafe today? Lucas frowned, clearly caught off guard. What? Sophie said she saw you with someone, Evelyn said, crossing her arms. A brunette. Who was she? Realization dawned on his face and he let out a soft sigh. Evelyn, that was Claire. She's an interior designer I've been meeting with about the furniture line. She's helping me figure out the aesthetics for the branding and showroom. Evelyn blinked, her heart still racing. You didn't think to tell me about her? I didn't think it was a big deal, he said, his tone calm. She's just a business contact. Nothing more. But you promised no more secrets, she said, her voice trembling. Why didn't you mention her before? Lucas ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping into his expression. I wasn't trying to hide anything. I didn't think it would matter. Evelyn, you have to trust me. I'm trying, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. But it's hard when I feel like I'm always second-guessing everything. His face softened and he stepped closer, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. Evelyn, you're not second to anything or anyone. Claire's just a colleague. That's it. Please don't let this come between us. She looked up at him, searching his golden eyes for any sign of deception. All she saw was sincerity, but the doubts in her heart wouldn't quiet. The tension lingered for the next few days. Lucas tried to reassure her, sending her messages throughout the day and making an effort to include her in his plans. But Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding him back, that her insecurities were becoming a burden. One evening, as they sat together in her apartment, Lucas brought it up. Evelyn, he said, breaking the silence, we need to talk. Her chest tightened. About what? About us, he said gently. I feel like you're pulling away and I don't know how to fix it. I'm not pulling away, she said quickly. I don't know. I feel like I'm not good enough for you. His expression turned pained. Evelyn, don't say that. You're everything to me. I don't know how to make you see that. She looked down, her fingers twisting together. I don't want to lose you, Lucas. But sometimes I feel like it's only a matter of time before you realize I'm not what you want. He reached out, tilting her chin up so she was looking at him. That's never going to happen. I love you, Evelyn. I don't care about your doubts or your insecurities. I want you just as you are. Tears spilled down her cheeks and she leaned into his embrace, clinging to him as though he were her anchor in a storm. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. I know, he whispered, holding her tighter. But I'm not going anywhere. We'll get through this together. I promise. That night, as they lay side by side, Evelyn felt a small glimmer of hope. She knew her insecurities wouldn't disappear overnight, but for the first time in a long while she believed that maybe, just maybe, they could be overcome. Lucas's steady presence gave her strength, and as she drifted off to sleep, she silently vowed to try harder to trust him more. Their relationship was far from perfect, but in that moment, it felt worth fighting for. And Evelyn wasn't ready to give up, not on Lucas and not on herself. Winter began to thaw in Willow Ridge, giving way to early signs of spring. The snow melted into streams that trickled through the woods, and patches of green peeked through the frost. With the changing season came a cautious optimism in Evelyn's heart. She and Lucas had reached a fragile peace after their confrontation about Claire. Lucas continued to go out of his way to prove his devotion, and Evelyn was trying, truly trying, to let go of her doubts. But the wounds of insecurity, though scabbed over, still lingered. One Saturday morning, Lucas surprised Evelyn with a picnic in the woods. He arrived at her apartment with a basket slung over his arm and a mischievous glint in his golden eyes. What's this? Evelyn asked, raising an eyebrow as she opened the door. A date, he said, grinning. Get your coat. We're going somewhere special. Curiosity and excitement bubbled up in her as she quickly bundled up. Lucas led her down a trail through the woods, his hand warm in hers. They talked and laughed, the tension that had hung over them for weeks finally lifting. After a short hike, they arrived at a small clearing by a frozen stream. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light on the forest floor. Lucas spread out a blanket and unpacked the basket, revealing sandwiches, fruit, and a thermos of hot chocolate. Evelyn couldn't help but smile as she sat down beside him. This is perfect, she said, looking around at the peaceful scene. Good, Lucas said, handing her a sandwich. You deserve perfect. As they ate, Lucas brought up his plans for the furniture line. He showed her photos of the pieces he'd been working on and shared his ideas for the showroom. I was thinking, he said, maybe we could work on some pieces together. You've got a great eye for design and I could use the help. Evelyn blinked, taken aback. Me? I don't know anything about furniture design. You don't have to, Lucas said with a shrug. You have good taste and I trust your instincts. Besides, it'd be nice to have you involved. Warmth blossomed in her chest at his words. I'd like that, she said softly. Good, he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Because I want us to build something together. Not just furniture but a life. For a while, everything felt like it was falling into place. Evelyn threw herself into helping Lucas with his business, offering input on designs and helping him brainstorm ideas for marketing. They spent long evenings in his workshop, working side by side and sharing quiet conversations. But the closer they grew, the more Evelyn's insecurities tried to creep back in. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was out of her depth, that Lucas deserved someone more confident, more accomplished, more like Claire. The breaking point came one evening when they attended a community event in town. Lucas had been invited to showcase some of his furniture, and Evelyn was there to support him. The event was bustling with locals mingling and admiring the various displays. Lucas's booth drew a lot of attention, and Evelyn couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as she watched him talk passionately about his work. But then Claire arrived. She was dressed impeccably, her dark hair swept into an elegant bun. She greeted Lucas warmly, and the two quickly fell into an animated conversation about the furniture line. Evelyn stood to the side, feeling invisible. Claire's confidence and poise were like a spotlight, highlighting everything Evelyn felt she lacked. She tried to remind herself that Claire was just a colleague, but the nagging voice in her head told her otherwise. When Lucas turned to introduce Evelyn, she forced a smile and shook Claire's hand. It's nice to meet you, Claire said with a polite smile. Lucas has mentioned you. He's lucky to have someone so supportive. Thanks, Evelyn said, her voice barely above a whisper. For the rest of the evening, Evelyn stayed quiet, her insecurities threatening to consume her. She watched as Lucas and Claire interacted, laughing and sharing ideas, and felt like an outsider in her own relationship. On the way home, Lucas noticed her silence. You okay? He asked, glancing at her as they walked. I'm fine, she said quickly, though her tone betrayed her. Evelyn, he said, stopping and turning to face her. Talk to me. What's wrong? She hesitated, her emotions bubbling to the surface. It's Claire, she admitted. I know she's just a colleague, but every time I see you with her I feel small. Like I can't measure up. Lucas's expression softened and he reached for her hands. Evelyn, you have nothing to worry about. Claire's great at what she does, but she's not you. She's not the one I think about when I wake up or the one I want to build a life with. But what if I'm not enough for you? She whispered, tears welling in her eyes. You are enough, he said firmly, pulling her into his arms. You've always been enough and nothing will ever change that. I wish you could see yourself the way I see you. Evelyn buried her face in his chest, letting his words wash over her. She wanted to believe him, but the battle with her insecurities was far from over. That night, as they lay together in the quiet of her apartment, Lucas held her close, his steady heartbeat a comforting rhythm. I love you, Evelyn, he murmured against her hair. I love you too, she whispered back. And for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope that maybe love was enough to quiet her doubts and heal the cracks in their relationship.
The arrival of spring brought more light into Willow Ridge, both in the blooming trees lining the town streets and the warmth seeping into Evelyn's and Lucas's lives. Yet for Evelyn, the inner storm of insecurity continued to cast a shadow over her heart. After their evening with Claire, Lucas had gone out of his way to reassure her. He asked her opinion on everything: the showroom layout, pricing strategies, even color swatches for the branding. Evelyn appreciated his efforts, but the voice in her mind, the one that whispered she was inadequate, was persistent. One Saturday morning, Evelyn decided to confront her fears head-on. Lucas had left early to visit the carpenter working on the next line of furniture, and Evelyn was determined to do something productive rather than let her thoughts spiral. She grabbed her laptop and opened a blank document. If she wanted to feel like she belonged in Lucas's world, she needed to step up. She began brainstorming ideas for marketing campaigns, using her knowledge of the town's small businesses as a starting point. Hours passed, and by the time Lucas returned, Evelyn had compiled a detailed outline for an upcoming launch event. "Hey," Lucas said as he stepped inside, brushing sawdust off his shirt. "What's all this?" Evelyn hesitated, suddenly nervous. "I put together some ideas for the showroom opening. It's nothing big, just a rough draft." Lucas scanned the document, his eyes widening as he read. "This is incredible," he said, looking up at her. "Evelyn, you thought of everything." Her cheeks flushed with pride, but she quickly waved him off. "It's just a start. You can change whatever you want." "No," he said firmly. "I love it. I want you to help me run this." The glow of his praise stayed with her all evening, but as much as she wanted to hold on to it, doubt crept back in when Lucas mentioned he'd be meeting with Claire to finalize some design elements the following week. When the day of Lucas's meeting with Claire arrived, Evelyn busied herself at work trying not to think about it. But by the time she got home, her thoughts were racing. What if Claire was everything Lucas needed? What if she, Evelyn, was just a placeholder? That evening, Lucas came over as he usually did, but something was different. He seemed quieter, distracted. Evelyn immediately noticed. "Everything okay?" she asked cautiously as he hung his coat. "Yeah," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Evelyn frowned. "Lucas, if something's wrong, just tell me." He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "It's nothing major. Claire mentioned that she might want to come on board as a partner for the showroom." Evelyn's heart sank. "A partner?" "Yeah," he said, his tone careful. "She has the connections and the expertise to help take things to the next level. It's just an idea we're tossing around, but I wanted to let you know." Evelyn nodded, but her stomach churned. Claire wasn't just a colleague anymore. She was becoming an integral part of Lucas's world. The following days were tense. Lucas tried to include Evelyn in discussions about the potential partnership, but she felt like an outsider looking in. She began withdrawing, avoiding his calls and spending more time alone. One evening, Lucas showed up unannounced at her apartment. "Evelyn," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "What's going on? You've been distant and I don't know what I've done wrong." She hesitated, her eyes brimming with tears. "It's not you. It's me. I can't stop feeling like I'm not enough for you, Lucas. You're building this incredible business and I'm just here. Claire fits into your world so effortlessly and I don't." Lucas stepped closer, his expression pained. "Evelyn, stop. I've told you before. Claire is just a colleague. You're the one I want to be with. You're the one I love. But what if I can't keep up?" she whispered. "What if I'm holding you back?" "You're not holding me back," he said firmly, cupping her face in his hands. "You're the one who keeps me grounded. You're the reason I'm doing any of this." She searched his eyes, looking for the reassurance she so desperately needed. "I'm trying to believe that," she said softly. "Then let me help you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Let me prove to you that you're enough. Because you are, Evelyn. You've always been enough." That night they stayed up late talking, laying everything bare. Evelyn admitted the depth of her insecurities, and Lucas shared his fears of losing her because he couldn't convince her of her worth. It wasn't easy, but by the time the sun began to rise, they had reached a new understanding. "I'm not going to let you push me away," Lucas said, his voice resolute. "I don't want to push you away," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "I just need time to figure out how to be okay with myself. And I'll be here," he promised. "For as long as it takes." As they held each other in the quiet morning light, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. Sometimes love wasn't about fixing everything. It was about standing together even when things felt broken. The weeks that followed felt like a slow but steady rebuilding. Evelyn and Lucas spent countless hours together, working, talking, and learning how to bridge the gap of unspoken fears that had lingered in their relationship. Their connection grew stronger, but it wasn't without its challenges. Evelyn still struggled with her insecurities, but every time she felt herself slipping, Lucas was there, steady, patient, and unwavering. And gradually she began to believe in herself again, to trust that she had a place in Lucas's world and in his heart. It was early summer when they decided to host the grand opening for the showroom. The space had come together beautifully, each piece of furniture reflecting Lucas's creativity and Evelyn's keen eye for design. The event was a success, drawing in a crowd that marveled at the quality and uniqueness of the collection. As the evening drew to a close with the last guests drifting out, Lucas pulled Evelyn aside. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said, his voice low but full of emotion. "You've been my partner in more ways than one, Evelyn." Evelyn smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "I'm just happy I could help." "You did more than that," he said, taking her hand in his. "You've helped me build something real, something that matters. But more importantly, you've helped me build a life with you. And that's everything." Her heart skipped a beat. "Lucas, I mean it," he said, looking into her eyes. "I know we've had our struggles, but we've always come through stronger. And I want to keep doing that with you. Forever." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as his words settled over her. "Forever." He nodded, his golden eyes soft with love. "I know we've been through a lot, but I can't imagine my life without you. You're everything to me, Evelyn." A tear slipped down her cheek as she smiled through the emotion that flooded her heart. "I love you. And I love you," he whispered, brushing the tear from her cheek before leaning in to kiss her. In that moment, everything clicked into place. She wasn't just a part of Lucas's world. She was his world. And he was hers. Months passed and their relationship continued to deepen. The showroom flourished, and Evelyn became more involved in its daily operations, her skills complementing Lucas's in ways they both never expected. Their bond was no longer fragile. It was fortified with trust, communication, and the unwavering belief that they could face anything together. Lucas's idea of a partnership had never been clearer. They weren't just business partners. They were life partners. One evening, as they stood in front of a new piece they had designed together, Lucas took her hand and turned to face her. "I've been thinking about the future," he said, his voice thoughtful. "And I want you to be a part of mine always." Evelyn's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Lucas smiled, a nervous but excited energy in his gaze. "Evelyn, will you marry me?" Her breath caught, and for a long moment she could only stare at him, her heart racing. "Yes," she finally whispered, the word falling from her lips like a promise. "Yes, I'll marry you." As Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them standing in the midst of their shared dreams. That night, as they sat together in the glow of the showroom's soft lights, Evelyn rested her head on Lucas's shoulder, feeling a sense of peace that she had never known before. Their journey had been anything but easy. They had weathered the storm of self-doubt, overcome the walls of fear and insecurity, and built a life together, one day at a time. And as they looked toward the future, they knew there would be more challenges, more hurdles to cross. But they also knew with certainty that they would face them together. For the first time, Evelyn felt whole, not because of what she had accomplished or how others saw her, but because of the love they had built brick by brick with patience, understanding, and unwavering support. It was a love that would last a lifetime, and beyond.